Hey, this is Nathan Dawkin from Fantrax HQ, as well as the NastyCast and Fantrax Dynasty Baseball Podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 92, Office Space Movie Review. Hey, Chris McBrien here, along with Caveman Derek Myers. As always, you're going to find us on Twitter at CMcBrien for myself, at Amaron_DM for Derek. PopGoesYourWorld.com is the website. And if you listen to the show on iTunes, make sure you take a minute and leave us a review. We would definitely appreciate that. Wouldn't we, Derek?
Yes, we absolutely would.
What's new in your life, my friend?
Well, we got the Oscar nominations in the last couple of weeks since we've recorded our last show. We were obviously off last week, but during that time, I was able to see a few more of the nominees for Best Picture. So 8 movies were nominated for Best Picture.
How many have you seen?
I've seen 7 out of 8.
You have a lot of time on your hands. That's pretty good.
Well, you know, I don't have kids, so that frees up a lot of time for me. So the only one I haven't seen yet is The Favorite, which I plan to watch this week. Over the last week, since you and I chatted, I watched A Star is Born, I watched Green Book, and I watched Vice. I enjoyed all 3. A Star is Born, I watched it once. I enjoyed it. I thought the music was good. I thought the performances were good. I thought the direction was good. But that's it. I don't ever have to see it again. It really wasn't my kind of movie. And as much as I love Bradley, I got a man crush on Bradley Cooper, once was enough. Vice, about Vice President Dick Cheney, was amazing. It was directed and I believe also written by the guy who did The Big Short a few years ago. And it's shot in sort of that similar style where it's not all told in a linear fashion, and they cut away to explain complicated topics in a way that makes it really easy to understand. They break the fourth wall a lot of times in the movie, and Christian Bale was exceptionally good. I have no doubt he's going to win an Oscar. And then the other one was Green Book.
Just one thing about Vice. So do they include the scene where Cheney shoots the guy in the face when they're hunting?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Jeez. Oh, yeah. Man. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Christian Bale literally transforms himself, and if you didn't realize you were watching this fictional, well, I guess it's a non-fictional movie, he looks so good. He put on the weight, and they gave him the makeup. He looks so much like Dick Cheney. It's kind of scary.
I will say this: my wife and I went to see a movie, a little while ago, a couple months ago, and there was a trailer for Vice. And I'm watching the trailer. I'm like, okay, whatever, watching it. And then all of a sudden at the end, they say, starring Christian Bale. And I'm like, which one was he? Christian Bale was in that? Well, which one is he? And my wife was like, oh my God, he was Dick Cheney. I was like, what? Like, I just didn't recognize him in the trailer. I didn't know that was Christian Bale.
Yeah, he was so good.
Transformative performance.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I mean, Rami Malek is a runaway freight train. He won the Golden Globe. He won the SAG Award. So he's certainly picking up steam. And as we've talked about previously, when Bohemian Rhapsody first came out, I thought Rami Malek did a great job portraying it, Freddie Mercury, even though the movie itself had some inaccuracies with the real life of Queen. I do think that he's going to be a serious contender for this award, but I think it's I don't think he's going to surpass Christian Bale. I think Christian Bale just was so much better. And then the third one I saw was Green Book. I think Mahershala Ali is absolutely a lock on Best Supporting Actor. The movie was great. I don't think it's going to win Best Picture. There is a lot of behind the scenes baggage that's attached to Green Book. We won't necessarily go into that right here, right now. But if you sort of push that aside and you watch the movie, I think it's an enjoyable movie. I think a lot of people liked it. I think the performances were good. Viggo Mortensen is great. Mahershala Ali is great. And it's those are 3 good picks. Like I think the 8 movies we've got nominated this year, it's a good batch.
So I have a question for you, and this is kind of interesting because this podcast is kind of neat because it tends to be evergreen. Like, and what I mean by that is obviously people can listen to it like a year or 2 down the road. They can go back and listen to the shows because we're talking about movies and stuff from a while ago and stuff like that. So it's usually evergreen. But that being said, so people will listen to it, in 6 months from now or a year from now or whatever. But what do you think is going to win Best Picture for the year 2018? What movie's going to walk away with the prize?
I think Roma's going to win.
Roma, yes. I really want to see that. You recommended that to me.
On Netflix.
Yeah.
It's on Netflix right now. It is. It has the most nominations of any movie. The director is absolutely going to win. He won for Gravity, the movie starring Sandra Bullock.
It's Cuarón, right?
Cuarón, yes.
Yep.
If you're doing your Oscar pools, that is a lock, 100%. He is absolutely going to win. I'm fairly confident that Roma will also win, and it may not be a popular choice among the mass population that's watching the show, because I think a lot of people maybe aren't going to watch it because it's a foreign film, it's subtitled, it's black and white. But it's on Netflix, so it's accessible to so many more people than a movie that's, say, in the theater that people don't necessarily have the time or the energy to leave their house and go and drop their $20 and go see a movie. So, and it is a technical masterpiece. Like, this guy knows how to make a movie.
Mm-hmm, no kidding. One thing I wanted to mention before we get into the movie this week, my son is 9 years old, and it's getting to that time of the year where he has to do a speech in his class, right? So all of his buddies and all of his friends there, they're doing speech topics like Minecraft, and one of them's doing on Fortnite and all this. My son is doing his speech on Queen.
Oh, they're going to say Happy Days.
That would have been something else.
No, Queen, I love it. I love it. Now, let me ask you this.
Yep.
Chris, you're not afraid to speak in front of people. You're a teacher, for God's sake.
Yep.
You give speeches.
Yep.
You've been a performer.
Yep.
And I'm certainly not shy either. I love speaking in front of people. How's your kid? Does he like speaking in front of people? Or is he a shy kid? Is he a little bit nervous about being in front of the group?
Overall, he comes off as being like he's not shy at all. But I will say, last year he did a speech on Star Wars, the original Star Wars movie from '77, and when he practiced at home with me, he was hitting the highs, hitting the lows. He had inflection in his voice. He was just hitting everything. And then I went to see him. He actually got picked. So he did it for his class, and he got picked to do it in front of the whole school. So I was just so proud. And I went there, but I think he was maybe a little bit nervous because the inflection wasn't there as much. He was a little bit sort of shy in a way when he did it. So I don't know if maybe because he had to go in front of the whole school, their parents and stuff like there. I mean, it's hard, man. He was only 8. Now, mind you, that being said, I'm going to tell you a quick little story, and then we'll get started. When I was 8, I remember we did this play. And I was in grade 3 or something at the time. And we had done this school play. And people had roles in it. Like, if you didn't have a speaking role, you would be like a tree or something like that. It's one of those kind of plays. And I convinced the teacher that what I would do is my role was I was going to warm up the audience. and
that's so perfect, Chris.
That's so me, because she was even like, "What does that mean? Warm up the audience? You're 8. What are you talking about? How do you even know what that is?" And I'm like, "I'm going to come out before the play, and I'm going to warm up the audience. I'm gonna tell a couple jokes. I'm gonna put them at ease. I'm gonna get them ready for the show." And she's like, "What even is this?" And then I was able to convince her it was a good idea, and she let me do that. So when I was 8, I was out warming up the audience. As you said, I have no problems with talking to people, so I like it. So anyway, on that note, let's get started.
I mean, we love him, we hate him, we agree, we disagree.
Freddie Mercury is the greatest singer who ever was. He is the greatest singer that ever will be.
Some of the things in Freddie Mercury's real life were possibly X-rated.
There is no way Rocky was a better movie than Taxi Driver.
I love this idea.
Probably the greatest film that's ever made.
And I just picked it on a whim.
And we can have a couple beers, and we can play Escape from the Death Star.
Walking in a winter wonderland. I try to pick something Christmas.
This is a bargain trick question! Okay, so Derek, you nominated the film for this week. It's 1999's Office Space. Do you want to start us off? Talk a little bit about the movie, why you nominated it. I had never seen the movie before you mentioned it. I know it was a big cult hit, but I didn't really know much else about it. So I had the chance, obviously, to watch it, and I'm ready to go. But why did you nominate this film?
All right, so let me tell you a little bit for people who maybe haven't seen the movie or haven't seen it in a while. They're like, that sounds familiar. Let me just sort of sum it up as quickly as I can about what the movie's about. So it is a group of friends that work in a computer company as a part of a bank. They basically are going over banking software in preparation for the Y2K crisis, which our younger listeners are going to say, I have no idea what that is. In last century, when they started doing computer programming and they had to enter the dates, in order to save space in the code, instead of writing 1984, they just wrote 84. for a while, no problem. But when we got to 1999, it was going to roll over to 2000. If there weren't any changes made to the code, it would think it was 1900 instead of 2000, and that would potentially cause all sorts of technical problems. So many companies, every company, spend a lot of time, a lot of money hiring people to review their software and make the necessary changes so that when it went from 99 to 2000, it would understand that it went from 1999 to 2000 and not 1999 back to 1900. So the characters in this movie, that's their job. And it is absolutely as boring a job as you might imagine. And that's a large part of where the humor comes from in this movie. So these guys basically have this crappy job that they hate, and they're in a rut. They're going through the same routine every day. And then the one guy gets sick and tired of it. He agreed to go to couples counseling with his girlfriend, and he gets hypnotized. And he says to the counselor, who's a hypnotherapist, can you make it so that, when I go to work, I don't feel so crappy, that my work doesn't bother me nearly as much as it does? Can you make it seem like today's the best day of my life instead of the worst day of my life? And so the hypnotist does that. And then, of course, the guy has a heart attack and dies. So they never bring him out of the hypnosis. And hilarity ensues as he now has no worries and no fears, and he no longer hates his job, and he no longer has any inhibitions. He has no filter. He goes to work and he tells everybody exactly what he thinks about the job and about them and about his role there. And so that's what, and then, things happen. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's sort of the premise, the setup of the first 20 minutes of this movie. Now, when I first saw this movie, I saw it on video. I never saw it in the theater, but it would have been like in 2000. In the year 2000, I started working at a bank. Now, I wasn't a coder working on bank code for the Y2K compliance thing, but I worked with a lot of people who had that kind of job, and my job touched on their job a lot. So I really personally was able to identify with the characters. A lot of times you go to a movie and you go, I know a guy just like that. I know a guy just like that. When I watched Office Space, half of the characters, I'm like, I know a guy like that, or that's me to a certain extent. And so I was really able to see myself on screen and relate to these characters, and that just made the humor so much funnier to me. The movie, in my opinion, is tremendously funny. There's a lot of very humorous scenes, and being able to identify that closely with so many of the characters just made it funnier and funnier. And I just watched this movie again last week, and I still laughed my butt off the whole way through. There's so many good things in this movie, so many great lines, so many memorable scenes, so much comedy. And Chris, I really hope that when we get to you, you're not going to just slam this movie, but I loved it. I thought it was great. It wasn't a box office hit, but when it got out on video, a lot of people found it and recommended it and shared it with their friends. They shared it on video, they shared it on DVD, and it continuously runs on cable. And I think even 20 years later, people have jobs that they don't necessarily love, that they don't want to go to every single day, and that they're fed up, and they watch this movie and they can really relate with these characters and say, yeah, I wish I could have a situation where someone could just hypnotize me and I wouldn't feel my job sucks quite as much as this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris. Tell me a little bit about your experience with this movie.
Well, I get it. It's, it's supposed to be a funny movie about miserable people, right? Overall, I would say I liked it. I enjoyed it. I didn't love it. I think at times it's kind of boring. It's the thing is for me is it's nothing like sort of the classic comedies of the 70s and 80s. And it seems crazy to say, well, it's not like the good old movies, when we're talking about a movie that's 20 years old, because I'm really going back. But there's something about those kind of 80s kind of comedies that were just, I feel like they almost stopped making really good comedies, in the 80s. I think maybe Coming to America might be like kind of the last of them. There was one in 97 called Private Parts. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
The Howard Stern movie? Love it.
And it was great. And to me, it was irreverent but lovable at its heart type movie. It kind of reflected like those 70s and 80s comedies. But since then, I haven't seen anyone really do it outside of maybe Judd Apatow. Anyway, so that being said, this movie, like I say, it was pretty good. And I get some of the things you mentioned. It didn't do well when it came out. It bombed when it came out. Like it just bombed.
Sure did. Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll get into that tonight, for some of the reasons why it did. I'd like to concentrate on some of the things I liked and then didn't like about the movie tonight. But I mean, I just get that kind of like you were talking about the redundancy of their job. But also for me, the thing that struck me was the redundancy of management.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, I mean, like, I remember the one guy, he's like a manager, and he basically does nothing every day. And he admits as much in his interview with the two consultants. And speaking of those two consultants, even those guys, like they reinforce this point because they both have the same name. They're both Bob.
Yeah.
You know? But one of the things that kind of stuck out to me in this movie was when I was watching the scene when they go to the is it Tchotchkes, the restaurant, right? Yeah. And there's a guy there, the waiter, and he's like all like, you know, outgoing guy. And I first see him, I'm like, where have I seen that guy before? And then the same thing with that obnoxious guy. You know, the guy they work with, I think his name's Drew in the movie. He's the one that told Peter that Jennifer Aniston slept with Lumbergh. Yeah, that guy. And I seen him in the same thing. I'm like, where have I seen this guy before? And then I looked him up. And I realized I hadn't seen him in anything else. Like, I didn't recognize him from anything. And it made me realize something about this movie. I don't think you're supposed to recognize the actors, but instead you're supposed to recognize the characters, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. They are basically archetypes of people you would find in an office or in the areas that are tangential to an office. So you have your office people, but when they go for the breaks, they go here, and these are the kind of employees they have to deal with. Like he says, "Oh, someone's got a case of the Mondays," and like you know that guy says that every Monday, no matter what, and it drives them crazy.
When they went to cast the movie, but obviously went with unknown actors, and these are the kind of things that get studio execs really upset, right? Because they want stars in the movie, right? To increase the box office draw. But the whole point of this movie is to, like, just like you said, it's to present a workplace that's relatable, right? You're supposed to watch this movie and say, hey, I know that guy from my work. Or, you know, I work right beside a guy like that. You know what I mean? So regardless of what the studio heads want, if this movie would have been made with a bunch of Hollywood stars, it would have lost that relatability factor.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
Nobody is going to watch a movie with Tom Cruise in it and go, oh man, I work with a guy just like Tom Cruise.
So let me
unless maybe you work at the Religious Technology Center at the Church of Scientology. You know, this is not the case, right?
So let me interrupt you here.
Sure.
So, I have a subscription to Entertainment Weekly magazine, and I've had this subscription for, probably 20 years now. They practically give it away for, like, I think I'm getting them for like 25 cents an issue. It's ridiculous how cheap it is because they want you to keep getting the print subscription. In the issue that was sent to my house a couple of weeks ago, like I think in the last 2 or 3 weeks, they did a 20-year retrospective of Office Space. It was just coincidentally, after I suggested to you we watch this movie, I started going through some of my EWs that had shown up in the last few weeks, and sure enough, as I was reading through, I found this article, and in it, they interview the various members of the cast. They interview Mike Judge, and they ask him like about casting what ifs. Who else was on the short list? And the main guy, Peter, who ended up being played by Ron Livingston, they almost cast Matt Damon right after he did Good Will Hunting.
Matt Damon.
Yeah, they wanted Ben Affleck and Matt Damon both to be in this movie.
Yeah, they were.
Not mistaken. The studios did. Yeah.
Yeah, the casting director was. She had a flight booked to go meet Matt Damon the next day, and somebody who knew Ron Livingston said, "Hey, you got 15 minutes right now. Can you just meet this guy? Let him read for this part." And she's like, "Yeah, sure, fine." And they said he was just so amazing. They're like, "You know what? I don't think we need Matt Damon. We're going to go with this guy who at the time was completely unknown." And they were like, "Yeah, he's perfect. Let's keep him." But had he not been available that day, or the casting agent was like, "I'm going to fly out and talk to Matt Damon first," because the studio absolutely wanted some big names in it, this could have been Matt Damon in Office Space. And, you know, I don't think it would have the longevity it has. I don't think it would have had the relatability. I don't think it would have been I don't think it would have gained the following it gained long term if it had those big stars. Exactly like you say. It's harder to identify with this guy who has such a hard life if he looks like Matt Damon.
The part of Peter could not have been played by Matt Damon.
Matt Damon.
Like there's no way he could have played the part, because here's the thing, if the character had any kind of charisma or confidence in any way, he would just walk away. He'd be like, "I'm better than this job. I'm out of here. See ya." Like the character had to be kind of a little schluppy. You know what I mean? He had to be somebody that felt like he was trapped in that job. That's the whole point of the movie. And going back to what we were saying before about not having stars in it, that is kind of the genius of this movie in a way, if you can say that, because you know these characters. You don't know the actors. It's not about who's in this movie. It's about the characters. And every character in the movie is relatable to the audience. Every character, you just look at it, you're like, I know that guy. I know that guy. I know that guy. So, yeah, Matt Damon could not have been in this movie. I just don't see the way.
Yep. No, it's and so one of the things that I love about Office so for me, a movie that has
although I will say, sorry, just jump in, it would have been neat if Matt Damon was in it to hear Milton say Matt Damon.
Yeah.
With that
So one of the things to me that makes a movie great, that really emphasizes that a movie has staying power, longevity, stands the test of time, is does it have memorable lines? Is it a quotable movie? Now, I'm not saying every movie that has passed the test of time is quotable, but if you think back to your favorite movies of all time, I'm sure you're able to pull out a half a dozen quotes that if you just said that randomly to someone, they would instantly say, "That's from Star Wars," or "That's from Jaws," or whatever it might be. Office Space, I think, has enough of those that people do recognize it. Now, I don't think it's nearly as memorable as Star Wars or Jaws by any stretch of the imagination, but I think people who saw it and have enjoyed it and maybe have even seen it a couple of times in the last 20 years, if you start throwing out some of the quotes and some of the lines, they'll get it, especially when you say to people, I'm going to have to ask you to come in on Saturday. Like, they know. They're like, "Oh my God, that's from that movie, that Office movie," and you're like, "Yes, it is." And there's a number of other examples, and I think that that works. I think that's a big part of the success of the movie. Is that
I will say this: that going into this movie, I heard that same thing. I heard people saying like, "Oh, this movie is so quotable; it's just got all these quotes," and I didn't come away from this movie thinking that it was all that quotable. And you know how much I love movies that you can quote. Like you and I can do like Caddyshack and like Stripes all day long,
Sure.
But this one, it didn't. The only one is, that yeah was one. And the only one that stood out to me as a sort of a quote was, "Did you get the memo?" Like that one stands. If I said, "Did you get the memo?" You'd be like, okay, it's Office Space. But other than that being said, I don't think that I think there was some pretty funny lines in the movie, but I don't know if it was all that quotable. And I know I've heard that a lot, and I was a bit taken aback. Like I like when Peter's talking. I don't know what the guy's name is. It's Diedrich Bader plays he plays the guy
Lawrence
next door.
is the roommate.
Lawrence.
Yeah.
Okay, when he's like
breast exams, Channel 6.
Yeah, when Peter says to him, "What would you do if you had $1 million?" and the guy's like, "I tell you what I do, man. I do 2 chicks at the same time." And it's like I thought there was funny lines in it. And when the guy was talking about he had an idea for a jump to conclusions, Matt, and then and the guy's like, "That's the worst idea I've ever heard in my life." So there was lines in there that made me laugh. I thought it was pretty good. And then the guy I don't remember his name. He's like, he basically like is in like a full body cast and his like neck is on support and everything. And he's like, "Oh, remember, if you hang in there, good things can happen to you. Just look at me." like so there was lots of funny lines, but I just don't know how many quotable lines came out of it. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. That was my takeaway.
Well, so I was sort of making a list as we were chatting. So like, I think things like the reference to a TPS report, I think anyone who works
that's true. Okay, that
brings that up a lot. And often I've even done it myself, or I've heard people do it where you're in a meeting and someone's like, "We need a this and a this," and someone goes, "Yeah, I'll get you this, and I'll make sure to throw in the TPS report with that." And you hear a few people chuckle because they sort of get that it's like a joke being thrown in. The reference to the swing line stapler is big in office culture, and I've got a little anecdote about that. We'll tell you that a bit later. Where they talk about, are you wearing your 30 pieces of flair? I hear that a lot. And then, like the whole, with the slow drawl, it's like, of course, everyone's like, that's totally from Office Space. So there are definitely a few. And I think, again, some of them are more just situational things. If this happens and you respond with a certain line, people catch it and they're like, yeah. And if you work in, I know you don't work in an office like I do, where it's like cubicles and corporate culture.
I used to though.
Yeah, I think it's more of I hesitate to use the term niche movie, but I think people who work in that environment day in day, like I've been working in a bank now 20 years, and there's a lot of parts in, like I just watched Office Space again this week, and there's stuff that I picked out of it, and I'm like, oh my God, we just did that. Whereas a decade ago, even though I had 10 years experience at the bank, maybe I hadn't personally experienced that kind of thing, and then sure enough, oh my God, that absolutely happens in my office. So
I thought it was interesting. We were talking before about we couldn't have got big actors in this movie because you needed the small parts. And I mentioned how the studio types always want actors, big names in this. And the thing is that I'm assuming that's why Jennifer Aniston got in this movie, because they needed one name, so the studio kind of got their way. And funny enough for me, she's the worst part of the movie, because like her appearing in this movie, it proves my point. Movie stars just sort of distract from sort of the realism of a movie like this. Now, I know she wasn't like a quote-unquote movie star. She was a TV star, right? But by 1999, Friends was a massive hit. So she had star power, right?
Yes.
But the problem for me is, like, she's too good-looking to be the waitress at Tchotchkes. And every scene she's in, the movie goes flat for me. And like I say, I get it. They probably never would have got the movie greenlit, unless they had her on board. I get it. But casting her in the movie, I think, was one of the worst parts of the movie.
Yeah, I'll agree. The parts with her certainly didn't really appeal to me that much. They seem to take away, like for me, it's called Office Space. I wanted to see more about the office and the people that work in the office. And yeah, I get it that she's sort of dating the guy from the company, but by the time he gets the courage to ask her out and date her, like he's now changed. And so I don't necessarily think that really adds to the humor or even drives the story forward as much as I wanted it to. Now, in the EW article I was just talking about, they mentioned how because she was literally the only real recognizable star from the movie at that time, they wanted to put her face on the poster.
Oh,
and
God,
so it would have been like – and that was one of the things in the article Mike Judge talks about, how he's like, they really didn't know how to market the movie, and they were pitching all these ideas, and the studio kept saying, we have Jennifer Aniston in this movie. She's in Friends. She's hot. Let's put her on the poster so people know she's in the movie. And he's like, whoa. The movie's not about her. Like, the main plot of the movie has literally nothing to do with her. You can't put her face on the poster and sell it as a Jennifer Aniston movie. People are going to be ticked off. That's not what this movie's about. And, I think greater heads prevailed. They do not have her on the movie poster. Now, the poster they do have is just a guy covered in Post-it notes.
Which goes back to your point about how they don't know how to market this movie.
Yeah.
Because I saw that too. I'm like, why is that guy in all these Post-it notes? Like, the studio didn't know what the hell to do with this movie, did they?
No, it seemed, from what I've read, it was one of those things where Mike Judge got enough money to make the movie, and it's almost like he made it and they sort of forgot about it. And then when it was done, they're like, oh yeah, we have this thing. Well, we've already paid the money. Let's put it out. And I think that's a big part of why it did not do well in the theaters. But as I mentioned before, I worked at the video store for a lot of years. Now, I was obviously done at the video store and working at the bank by the time Office Space came out. But I still had a lot of friends who worked at the video store, and that was part of how I found this movie. Is I'd go into the video stores and I would talk to my friends. I go, what's hot? What do you like? And they're like, have you seen this movie Office Space? I'm like, never heard of it. And they go, it's about guys working at a bank. This is about you. You should watch this. And I watched it and I loved it. And I bought my own copy and I was sharing it with all the people in my office, and nobody had heard of it. And they were all like, this movie's fantastic. But again, it was something that people discovered on video, on cable, on DVD many years down the road, and if they work in an office, if they used to work in an office, they were able to identify with somebody. That guy's just like my boss. That guy's just like the guy who sits next to me. A guy I know in my office always has a problem with the printer, just like that guy. I wish I could be those guys who go and take that printer into the field and smash it to bits, because I have a printer in my job that's just as hard to work with as that thing. So.
Oh, well, you mentioned about how it became a cult hit, and it wasn't even really through video, really. It was Comedy Central was a new channel at the time, and they needed content. So they got this movie, and they just ran it over and over and over again, and it really found an audience. Like you mentioned, like it bombed when it came out, but it kind of found an audience over time. A couple things I want to talk about, because there's a couple parts of this movie that I really like. Jennifer Aniston notwithstanding, I didn't like her. But a couple of actors that I did like in it. I'll start with Gary Cole. Gary Cole, I think he might be one of the most underrated comedic actors of the last 25 years. I swear. I cannot believe this guy is not bigger than he is. Like, he should have been getting roles like crazy. I think the thing is, casting directors just don't know what to do with him. It's just too bad. The guy's got talent.
So let me tell you what I love. So I agree. I love Gary Cole in this movie. I think he's great. Two performances that he does that I think are completely underrated. the Brady Bunch movies.
I was going to mention that as well.
Where he plays the dad. It's like, as an actor, he realizes this is how I have to play this part to make it work. You can't take it too seriously, but you can't be too over the top with it. But you have to pay homage to the show, but you have to bring something new to it. And it has to be funny because it's a comedy, but it can't be too funny to take away from the scene. He is so good in those Brady Bunch movies, which I gotta be honest, I didn't really care for the movies that much, but his parts are amazing. He is so good in that.
I agree. The incredible thing with it is that he looked nothing like Mike Brady. Or I guess I should say like Robert Reed, right, who played Mike Brady. He looked nothing like him. But Gary Cole had Robert Reed's voice down pat.
Yes.
It was uncanny. Like, he had his voice just to a T. God, he was good at that. I agree. I'm glad you mentioned that. Like, the other one you're going to mention
is not a comedic role, but a dramatic, serious performance. He had a recurring role in The Good Wife, the television show with Juliana Margulies that we actually talked about a little bit.
Oh yeah, you mentioned you like that show, yeah.
And then the follow-up show, The Good Fight, he is in that as well, reprising his role, same character. He plays a Republican who is a gun expert, who is like a firearms expert, who is married to Baranski's character, and he is a no-nonsense, I know what I'm talking about, ballistics expert, and his role is amazing. He's not in a lot of episodes, and when he's in the episodes, he has very small parts because obviously the show's not about him. But oh my God, he is so good. He is so good. And if you're even a moderate fan of his and you have not watched The Good Wife or The Good Fight, I mean, that's a reason alone to watch. I mean, those shows are great, and I've talked about that before, but his performance in that, fantastic.
Like I say, I don't know why he's not bigger than he is. He started off in Chicago at the Steppenwolf Theater Company, but he never did Second City in Chicago, and I'm not sure why, because I think he would have been amazing on that stage. He was born in Chicago. You know, when I think of Gary Cole, I think he's like the perfect actor to be doing Second City. So I don't know, but man, he was perfect in this movie. So, the whole passive aggressive boss thing, God, he was good.
Yeah, for sure. Let me ask you this, a little tangent here. Yeah. So we talked about binge watching shows, and one of the shows you said you were going to try to watch was The West Wing. Are you still watching The West Wing?
So I watched the first 2 episodes, and I really liked it. I enjoyed it, but my wife, she thought it was boring. So it's been a bit of an uphill climb for me to get her to watch more episodes right now.
So without ruining too much, Gary Cole comes into the cast, I think in season 4 or 5, and he has a pretty significant recurring role in that for like the last 3 or 4 seasons. So again, dramatic performance, also quite good. Not a huge role, but enough that he's in a lot of episodes. So again, I know you're already looking forward to watching more West Wing, but if you needed another reason, he becomes one of the recurring characters. So he was great in that too.
Another reason why I got to get my wife to watch more of that. Okay, another guy in this movie I really liked was Stephen Root. Oh my God, he was perfect as Milton. Like, I mean, perfect. And before watching this movie, the only thing I'd ever seen him on was News Radio. And have you ever seen that show, Cave?
I have. I didn't really care for it. I'm not a big. I mean, I'm gonna have to turn in my Canadian card here, but Dave Foley is not my favorite Kids in the Hall actor. I'm not a big fan of his work, and so I really had a problem with News Radio. I get it. I mean, Dave Foley I thought Dave Foley was great in Kids in the Hall. I used to like that show. I went to see them live. They came to Brock University, and so I mean, I was always big fans of Kids in the Hall. But he's good at playing characters. But in that, he just plays this guy Dave, and he's just a normal guy, and it didn't really work. Mike Myers has the same problem. Mike Myers plays lots of characters, but when he tries to play himself, like in How I Married an Axe Murderer or something like that, it just doesn't pull it off. So I understand where you're coming from. But the show was good. Like it was very seminal because in addition to Dave Foley, there was like Andy Dick and Joe Rogan and Phil Hartman and Maura Tierney. Man, I had a major crush on her too. But Stephen Root was like this overbearing, sort of overconfident boss, which is the complete opposite of Milton in Office Space, which is so funny. But in this movie, like the way he would just sit there and mumble everything, and it was like this quiet desperation of him trying to keep his world intact. You know, like I don't want to move. You know, that's my stapler. And then he'd be like, I'll burn the building down. And like, how did this guy ever get a job in the first place? Like, he's a total antisocial psycho.
Like, what skills would he bring to the company? I just don't get it.
So one of the things that really I was able to identify with is when we in my office, whenever it's someone's like birthday or there's a wedding shower or some notable anniversary of some sort, they bring in a cake. And they always do the thing where, cut the piece, pass the cake.
Yep.
And I always end up sitting near the person who's cutting the cake. And so I'm always the one passing. And I always look at them and say, if I end up being the Milton in this event here, there's going to be a big problem. I'm going to have to burn the place down. And like 9 times out of 10, they look at me like, what?
Oh,
but
my
there's
God, yeah.
in the room that sort of chuckles. And yeah, more than once, that's been the thing where I'm the guy passing the cake. And then I'm like, hey, where's my piece? Sorry, we're all out of cake. I'm like, oh my God, I'm the Milton. So,
and I noticed during the opening credits that the movie is based on the Milton shorts, but it wasn't him that did it, right? It was Mike Judge that did those animated shorts, right?
Yeah.
And sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, no, keep going. I'll come back to Stephen Root here in just 1 second.
One thing you were going to mention about the stapler. So, what were you going to?
So let me get to this.
Yeah.
So, when they film the movie, there's a big part about the stapler, and these like he mumbles about the stapler, and Lumbergh comes over and takes the stapler, and that's like the MacGuffin of the movie where he takes the stapler, and he's like, "I'll burn the building down if you don't give me back my stapler," and it's a red swing line stapler. Well, once the movie started to get legs, and people started to watch this movie, they wanted a red swing line stapler. As just a little wink, wink, I've seen this movie, and this is my act of defiance against the man who owns my company. Well, Swingline didn't actually make a red Swingline stapler. All their staplers were black. And all of a sudden, they had all these inquiries. How do I get a red one? How do I get a red one? How do I get a red one? And people are like, the people at Swingline were like, where is all this coming from? Well, it turns out the prop department was asked in the movie to paint it red because black was too hard to see on screen. It just blended in with the other things on the desk. But by making it red, in every scene where the stapler is, you can clearly see it because it's bright red against all the other things on the desk. But because they didn't make one, people couldn't buy it. Well, eventually, Swingline realized this is why people want this thing, and there is such a huge demand that they now make a red Swingline stapler, and it is their #1 best-selling product and has been for like a decade.
And they also probably had to make it red because Root was wearing those thick glasses, and it's the only way he could see it to grab it. Because he'd have like no depth perception wearing those glasses, right?
Yeah. So yeah, little internet research there about the Swingline stapler. So, and I got to be honest, although I don't personally have a Swingline stapler, I know at least 3 different people that have deliberately gone out and either bought or ordered the red Swingline stapler just as the little middle finger FU subtle gesture to the boss of, I have the red Swingline stapler and this is my tribute to Milton, and if you don't treat me right, I'm going to freaking burn the building down. Not that they ever would, but it's that little hidden act of defiance among the corporate culture.
Just back to Gary Cole for a second, because I remember there's the sort of the sex dream scene where Lumbergh is there, and he's like apparently having sex with Jennifer Aniston, and he's like looking at the camera like he's talking to Peter, right? And he's like, he goes, just move a little bit to the left. Yeah, that's it. That's great. And it's funny because when they were shooting the scene, Mike Judge is the one that suggested that Lumbergh should have his coffee cup in his hand, and it made Gary Cole break up, right? And then they actually wanted to shoot it with him wearing his suspenders, and they thought, that's a little bit too much, right? But so I thought that scene was funny. Another scene that sticks out to me that I really liked was when the guy comes along and he's selling the magazine subscriptions. And they basically get him in. And he's like, I'm a crackhead and all this. So they bring him in and they start telling him about their money laundering scheme. And then they find out that he's actually like cognizant and he understands what they're saying. And he's like an engineer or a computer programmer or whatever he was. And then they're like, I'm watching it and I'm thinking, oh man, he's going to want in on this scheme. And then Peter is like kind of takes him outside and comes back in and goes, oh man, what am I going to do with 40 subscriptions to Jive? I laughed because I thought, I thought they're going to have to pay him off. Like they're going to have to like bring him into the scheme. No, he just wanted to sell more subscriptions. Oh man, it was so funny. I also liked how they used gangster rap in this movie.
Yes.
Even though these guys work at an office, it's just so, it doesn't fit in, with the movie, but I thought it was really funny too.
So this is another personal example. So my cousin, who's the same age as I am, I mentioned him that I have cousins my age in the comic book Stan Lee tribute podcast. I grew up a lot of summers spent with my cousins. My one cousin, also like me, works in an office day in, day out, and he loves hardcore gangster rap. It's his all-time favorite genre of music and has been since he was like in high school and university. But he's the whitest white guy you're ever going to meet. And he now works and lives in Chicago, like downtown Chicago. And so he said when he watched this movie, he couldn't stop laughing because he does exactly what the guy in this movie does. When he's coming in from the suburbs, he's got the rap music blaring in the car, and they're like, you know, it's totally uncensored and there's all this inappropriate language. And then when he gets into the heart of Chicago, he's like, okay, if I don't want to get killed today, I better turn the music down and roll up my windows, because if somebody hears this music coming from me, Mr. Whitey McWhitepants, I'm going to get shot. And so sure enough, he's like, turn the volume down, roll the windows up. And he's like, doop-a-doop, I'm a white guy going to the office now. Nobody pay attention to the fact that I like gangster rap music. And so that to me made it even funnier, because I could just picture my cousin doing exactly what this guy did at the start of the movie. So it's just, it just seems everybody I know someone who is like a guy in this movie, or it's like, I work with a guy like this, I know a guy like this, I have a boss like this. The movie, for me anyway, is just so relatable on so many levels, because almost every character I could say, I know a guy that's just like that.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that's really the appeal to the movie. Like, I mean, overall, though, still, like, I thought that it was okay, you know, overall. There were some things I didn't like about the scene where those two Bobs, the consultants, where they meet with Peter, and then remember they're all impressed with his attitude. That scene I didn't like. Like, I mean,
really?
I know it's played for comedy, but I mean, if you just told two consultants that you fish all day long and you work like 15 minutes a day, I don't think their reaction would be, hey, let's promote this guy. You know, like, I understand it's supposed to be cartoonish kind of in nature, but I not like I expect a lot of nuances in the characters, but to me that scene just didn't work. And Diedrich Bader, like I say, I generally like him. I liked him in Napoleon Dynamite. I thought he was funny in that. I liked him. He was a bit more of a subdued character in the Drew Carey Show. Mm-hmm. But here, I feel like he was almost miscast in this role. Like, yeah. The character should have stole every single scene he was in. And he had a couple of memorable moments, but a lot of it kind of fell flat for me. I mean, going back to what we said before about, you know, getting stars in, I think they wanted Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn for this part originally. And obviously, I'm glad neither one of them got it, but I thought it could have been funnier. There's just some parts of the movie just fell flat and just don't compare with like those sort of classic, you know, comedies of the 70s and 80s that I love so much.
Yeah, I think so. I'll definitely agree with you on that. I think that casting him in that role was not a necessity. It really could have been anybody. The role is so small and only has a few lines. You could have cast a nobody and potentially given them an opportunity to demonstrate a little bit of their acting chops, their comedic chops. But yeah, he's hardly in the movie, and the scenes he's in, it really could have been anybody. With Office Space, though, I found that for me personally, I think if you look at it as a 3-act play, Act 1 and 2, in my opinion, are great. Act 3, I felt really fell short. It was almost like they had this great setup, and it got to a point, and they're like, geez, how are we going to put a bow on this and wrap this up? And then they just sort of went, let's make this, and this happen, and done. And I just felt that you had this really, really good setup, and then once you had the setup, and he gets hypnotized, and he comes into work, and he tells them, this is what my day is actually like. And you start to see, like, how would things change if a guy actually was that direct and that blunt and that forthcoming? And then you see a little bit of that play out, and then I didn't really feel that the resolution and the conclusion was satisfying. That's sort of my only criticism of the movies. I just felt the Act 3 was very bland.
That's a good observation, I think, actually. And you just, when you mentioned that, that scene when he went to the doctor and got hypnotized, it kind of stood out to me because that's Mike McShane. The playing the doctor there, and I don't know if you know him. I remember him because he was on the original Whose Line Is It Anyway from England, the one with Clive Anderson. And I also remember him, he was in Seinfeld as Franklin Delano Romanowski. I don't know if you remember that or not. But
I don't. Honestly, I was never a big fan of Seinfeld when it went on originally, so.
But like I said, the other thing too, just to kind of wrap things up, I was never a big Mike Judge fan. Like, I got to admit, like, I never liked Beavis and Butthead. I mean, I thought it was dumb. And I didn't like King of the Hill. I don't even know how that show stayed on the air. And I think I mentioned before, I don't even know why was it animated?
Why was it animated?
Like,
Yeah,
there's
you
no
mentioned
real
that last
reason.
time.
Like when I watched the show that you told me to watch, Big Mouth,
Big
and I
Mouth.
watched, okay, there's a reason why that's animated. Like, I mean, all the stuff going on and the hormone monster and all that, it should be animated, right? But King of the Hill, it's just a bunch of guys standing around talking. It doesn't even need to be animated. But the thing that I will say Mike Judge did well was he made the movie relatable. And I think we've said that a couple times. Another good example is when they took that printer, and you mentioned it, they took it out in the field and they smashed the hell out of it. I think that's really relatable for a lot of people, especially when the Michael Bolton guy just goes back for more. Like, it's like they're done and then he goes back in for the kill more. Like, there's just something relatable about that. But the thing that I will say is this, and this goes back to what I said at the beginning. I know it's become a cult classic, but for me, it doesn't have that rewatchability factor that I find with Gen X movies like Stripes and Ghostbusters and Caddyshack that we mentioned earlier. Like, I can watch those movies a million times. And I don't think I could watch this movie a million times. There's just something about Gen X movies that set them apart. That's just my take. Yep.
So, two questions.
Sure.
First of all, do you think if you worked in an office and had always worked in an office, the movie would be more rewatchable because you might relate to it a little bit better?
No, because, I mean, I've never worked as a caddy, but I can watch Caddyshack a zillion times.
Okay, fair enough. Second point is, what if I told you you only had to watch the first hour? Do you think the first hour is something you could watch over and over again?
No, and I think maybe you're hitting on something, because to me, those Gen X movies, those Gen X comedies, the classic comedies that I love so much, for me, the first act is always the best. It's just setting things up. When you watch Stripes, the whole first half of the movie is just so good, setting things up. And this movie doesn't quite do that as well as those ones. So usually the first part of the movie is the favorite part of the movie for me, as a general rule with a lot of these comedies. But this one, it wasn't. I actually didn't mind the ending. I didn't mind the way it kind of resolved itself with Milton finding the envelope with the traveler's checks and going down south. So I didn't mind that resolution. I thought, it's kind of funny. It's entertaining. But no, so I wouldn't just be satisfied if I just had to watch the first half. It didn't stand out.
Okay. Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. So, Chris, overall,
Yes.
if you had to give this a score, either a score out of 1 to 10 or a letter rating, if it was do you give it a grade, where would you put this on your scale? Where does this weigh in for you?
I'd probably give it a 6.5.
6.5 out of 10?
Yep. Yeah, I'd probably give it a
All
6.5
right.
out of 10.
I would probably put it a little higher. I would say maybe a 7.5, possibly even an 8. But I think, again,
Right.
my opinion or viewpoint is a little bit more biased, partly because I do work in an office, I do work in a bank, and I think that for me personally, it relates a little more closely to my chosen occupation. So if I'm going to say it's a 7.5 or an 8, I would think for other people maybe it might be a little less than that, a 7.5. So I can see your 6.5 being a fair estimate.
Yep, that's
For
kind
an
of
old guy like you.
Yeah, easy there, man. Okay. Well, what do you say now we have some
Fun with Caveman.
All right, I tell you what, Caveman, since I love Gary Cole, and I mentioned that, and what this movie is really about is about having a crappy boss, I thought it might be a good idea for tonight to have some fun, and we'll play a little game that I'm going to call
Who's the Boss?
Okay, so here's how it works.
Okay.
I just mention a character from a movie or a TV show, and Caveman, you just tell me who their boss is. Okay?
You want the actor's name or the character's
I'm
name?
looking
or
for
is
the
either
I'm
acceptable?
looking for the character's name
Okay.
of the boss,
Geez, I'm gonna be
not the
terrible.
actor's
Jeez.
name. Okay?
Okay.
So here's what I'll do. I'll mention the character. You tell me
Yep.
who's their boss. It's that simple. Okay?
Okay.
All right. I'm going to start with an easy one. Dwight Schrute. Who's Dwight Schrute's boss?
I don't even know who that is, so I have no idea.
You've never seen The Office?
No.
Oh, you never seen the TV show The Office? Michael Scott. I just thought that was like the easiest
Okay.
one of all to start with. Oh my
I
gosh.
watched a few episodes. I didn't care for it. I stopped
Okay.
watching.
All right. Mary Tyler Moore. Who's Mary
Lou
Tyler
Grant.
Moore? Very good. Very good. There's one. All right. Carla Tortelli. Who is Carla Tortelli's boss?
Oh, she was in Cheers, so I got to think Sam Malone. is
Sam
boss.
Maloney's correct. Very, very good. Okay, here's an easy one. Waylon Smithers. Who is Waylon Smithers' boss?
C. Montgomery Burr.
Very good. Yes, it was. All right, this one's going backwards, but a classic, and one that I'm putting in here because I played him once in a play. Bob Cratchit. Bob Cratchit. Who is Bob Cratchit's boss?
Wasn't that the Christmas movie? Wasn't that Scrooge? Wasn't that Ebenezer Scrooge? Took me a second. I got there.
All right, well, let's go up to the 70s now. Roscoe P. Coltrane. Who was Roscoe P. Coltrane?
Dukes of Hazzard. That was Boss Hogg.
Yes, he was a boss. He was Boss Hogg. All right, here's another one sticking to the 70s. Alice, Flo, and Vera had a boss. What was his name?
That was Alice. They were Mel was the head of the diner, but I don't know what his last name was. We'll just say Mel.
We'll take Mel. It was Mel Sharples. Yeah, we'll take it. All right. Sticking with a time frame, Gopher, Julie, and Isaac the bartender had a boss. Who was their boss?
Isaac was from The Love Boat, but I never watched The Love Boat. I don't know.
It was Captain Steubing. Steubing was their boss. All right, here's an easy one for you. Clark Kent. Who was Clark Kent's boss?
Perry White.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's Superman. Who's Superman's boss?
Oh yeah. He worked in the Daily Planet.
He was only the boss at home.
Right.
At
there
work,
you go.
it was Perry White.
All right, here's one for you. Dr. Johnny Fever. Who was Dr. Johnny Fever's boss?
Oh, that was WKRP. It was I have no idea. I can picture the guy, the Maytag man. I can't think of his character's name.
Arthur Carlson.
Carlson.
I would have also accepted the big guy if you would have given me that.
Never would have.
Here's an animated one for you. George Jetson. What was George Jetson's boss's name?
I don't know.
You don't remember Mr. Spacely? Mr. Spacely. No? All right. Alex Rieger, Elaine Nardo, and the Reverend Jim Ignatowski all answered to the same boss. What was his name?
I don't know who any of those people are.
You never watched Taxi? It's Louis De Palma.
Never once.
All right, here's one I know you're going to get. James Bond. Who's James Bond's boss?
I got to think it was M.
That's impressed. Very good. All right, Elaine Bennis worked for a time. Oh, yeah, you didn't like Seinfeld at all.
What's his name? Mr. Peterman.
Oh, but you know it's J. Peterman.
I've seen some episodes of Seinfeld. Yeah, not many, but.
All right, how about Barney Fife? What was Barney Fife's boss's name?
That was Mayberry, right? Andy Mayberry? Andy. I don't know what his character's name. Andy, Chief Andy.
Yeah, it's Sheriff Andy Taylor. We'll give you that one. We'll give you that one. And then finally, the namesake for this game. No, it's not have to do with Happy Days. The namesake for this game itself, Tony Maselli. What was Tony Maselli's boss's name?
Oh, her name was Angela Bauer. Wow, I can't believe I remembered that.
Very good.
Holy cow.
You got Who's the Boss for Who's the Boss. I'm so impressed. Oh, that's just awesome.
Didn't get them all, but I got enough. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, there's a time for love and a time for living. Take a chance and face the wind.
Sing the holiday rap instead?
Exactly. Very good. Very good job on the Who's the Boss. I like it.
Thank you.
I thought it'd be a lot of fun to do that.
That was way more stressful than I imagined it would be.
Yeah, there you go. So it is what it is. So anyway, that's kind of it. We talked about Office Space. Hopefully you either agreed or disagreed with some of the things we had to say. If you want to reach out to us on Twitter, you can find us at Amaron_DM. That's Derek. At C. McBrien. That's me. PopGoesYourWorld.com is our website. All of our contact information is on there. If you want to shoot us an email or reach out to us, we'll make sure and get back to you. Until next time, this is Chris McBrien for Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.